bus on this track. This basically applies to both tracks because the master chain is the same, so that's why I want to just do it as one part for both songs, because the only things that changes are few settings here and there. So in terms of this track, this is the mixed track, this is the master track, so obviously I boosted the signal a little bit because it comes in quietly. So there's a utility tool with 2 dB boost just to give some more signal. A little bit of compression, not too much, because the only thing that I wanted to do is catch some peaks, like really slightly compression from the top, just to glue it together a little bit more without squashing it. And then I got 2 instances of EQ. This one is more for shaping the sound of the master. There's just few things going on here, nothing too drastic. Multi-band compressor, which there's not a lot of going on. I'm trying to push those lower frequencies a little bit more, because sometimes I feel like the bass is getting lost, and that's why I use like a bit more lower frequency compression than the top. Second EQ, this one works in a different mode. This is a mid-side mode, where I try to use it as a kind of a stereo widening plugin. So in terms of mids, I got basically all the low sections cut out, just to make sure that I got my drums and my kick, my bass, that it's all in mono. It basically stops right before the body of snare. And then in terms of sides, I boosted up top end a little bit to give it a much more space, especially with all of those reverbs going on. I pushed it a little bit more just to give it a little bit more space. Then I got a tape plugin, which I like to use just to give a little bit more saturation without boosting volume too much. It just warms up few of those frequencies, and also introduces a little bit of upper harmonics, so that's nice. And then at the end, a limiter which caps everything at -3, which I don't even think the master itself would get there. The same way of thinking and the same mastering chain applies to the second track as well, so I'm not gonna go through it 2 times. It's just a little bit different in terms of settings, but the whole chain is basically the same. Okay, so now I will quickly talk through my creative process on an example of track 1, and the same process applies to track 2. There's basically I decided to create 2 kind of synth poppy tracks that are not like a normal electronic music, and to create them more as tracks that some vocalists could sing over, with that kind of synth poppy stylistic. So the process that I used for this, after I chose all of my instruments, after I chose all of my samples, I decided to work in a session view and start building up some loops, some licks, some riffs on synthesizers. And then as I move forward, I tried to just basically layer it all together and then transfer it to arrangement view, and then do all the arrangement over here. So I exclusively used Push 2 for this, and I used mostly Silent 1 as my synthesizer plugin, with one exception of Serum on lead, and then obviously few effects. So in terms of drums, it's mostly 707 with toms from Simmons drums, with a drum bass on them, and the only interesting thing over here is snare drum which has slightly longer chain because I got a reverb on it and then gate to give it that signature sound of the 80s with the gated snare drums. Then we got bass. As you may see, there's not a lot going on either of these channels, just because I prefer to not overload my computer, because as I stated, like I think before I stated in the master video, my computer is not handling this very well, so I decided to, instead of using additional plugins on top of the synthesizer, I just use stuff like EQ or reverb directly from synthesizer plugin. That's why there's no EQs on a chain and no reverbs on it as well. I think the only instrument is the solo lead that goes into my reverb return channel, and then there's still a lot of effects going on, and there's some compression, there's some delay, and I think this is the only one without any EQ on it. In terms of automations, there is not a lot of going on, but I wanted to make that one really famous, basically like something that I think everyone does in terms of synth pop or synthwave. It's the, should be on my bass definitely, and it's filter cutoffs, automations for filter cutoffs at the beginning of the songs or in the middle. It gives it in my opinion, it introduces tracks really nicely, especially those tracks that are heavily focused on synthesizers. And yeah, I tried to work my way from arpeggios upwards. So I start with figuring out some cool nice sounding arpeggio with a nice sound on it, and then I started building up from it. So in this case I build it up, this up, then some simple bass line, and in terms of chords, if I can just quickly get this up over here, fold. There's nothing too complicated here. I basically written a simple four chords chord progression, and then just alternated it by moving some notes around. So a few of them are inversions, and that gave a little bit more of the dreamy vibe to this sound. While when it was your normal triads with a bass note, it didn't sound that well. It sounded kind of generic to me. So I just moved some chords around, made them visually less wide in terms of where they are on the keyboard. And yeah, that's basically it in terms of pads. They got also their own effects on synthesizer here. And let's get to what do I have on bells. On bells also Silent 1, same principle. Everything is on here. This workflow applies to both of the songs, and because I don't want to drag both videos too long, as it's only 10 minutes limit, this process basically applies to both of the songs. And yeah, I think that's basically it. The only thing that I regret not doing is playing it back, but as I said, because I'm already running Ableton, I'm running QuickTime, I'm running Loopback, when I tried to play it back, my computer was really close to exploding. So I'm just gonna leave it like this. There is a track 1 on which is the example for both mix and for master. So yep, that'll be it.